But what my daughter Jessica didn't know was that the confused old woman she'd been publicly humiliating as a burden had quietly spent 45 years as a real estate attorney, building a property empire worth $6.8 million and the legal. Reckoning I was about to unleash would teach her exactly why you should never announce someone's life decisions without checking if they actually need your permission. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had family make major announcements about your life without consulting you first. Make sure you're subscribed, because this story of how one mother's hidden legal expertise turned her daughter's public humiliation into the most expensive lesson about respect and assumptions will leave you speechless. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 70 years old, I thought I'd seen every type of family drama imaginable. I'd navigated 45 years practicing real estate law in the competitive San Francisco Bay Area, building a reputation as one of the most respected property attorneys in Northern California. I'd raised 3 children as a single mother after my husband David died in a construction accident when Jessica was only 8. I'd weathered financial crises, family disputes, and professional challenges that would have broken most people. I'd even survived my daughter's increasingly patronizing suggestions over the past 2 years that I might be slowing down and needed help managing my complicated affairs. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment when Jessica stood up at her own baby shower, champagne glass raised high in front of 30 guests, and announced to the room full of friends, family, and colleagues that she had wonderful news to share about her mother's living situation. The day had started normally enough. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late October, with that perfect California autumn weather that makes you grateful to live in the Bay Area despite the astronomical cost of living. I'd woken up early in my Spanish-style home in San Mateo, the same house David and I had bought 42 years ago, when it was just a modest 3-bedroom that we could barely afford on his construction worker's salary and my paralegal wages. Back then, the neighborhood was full of young families like us, people who'd stretched their budgets to buy into what we hoped would be an investment in our children's futures. We'd been right about the investment part. The house was now worth nearly $2.8 million, but we'd never imagined that someday one of those children would try to force me out of it. I'd spent the morning getting ready for Jessica's baby shower, with the kind of care you reserve for special family occasions. I'd chosen my best navy wool dress, the one David always said brought out my eyes, and paired it with the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 10th anniversary. The pearls had been a stretch for our budget back then, but David had insisted that every woman deserved to own something beautiful that would last forever. Someday, he'd said as he fastened the clasp around my neck, you'll be wearing these to our grandchildren's weddings. He'd been gone for 15 years now, taken by a crane accident on a job site that could have been prevented if the construction company had invested in proper safety equipment instead of cutting corners to maximize profits. The wrongful death settlement had been substantial enough to pay off our mortgage and provide for the children's education, but no amount of money could fill the hole David's death had left in our family. In the jewelry box on my dresser, I'd also carefully placed the gift I'd been working on for 3 months, a handmade baby quilt featuring a pattern of California poppies that I'd hand-stitched using techniques my own grandmother had taught me. Each tiny flower had been appliqued with precision, and the quilting pattern had taken weeks to complete. It was the kind of heirloom piece that takes patience, skill, and genuine love to create. I'd been genuinely excited about the baby shower. Jessica's first pregnancy had been a joyful surprise for our entire family, and I was looking forward to celebrating this new chapter in her life. At 37, Jessica had established herself as a successful marketing director at a prestigious Silicon Valley tech company, and her husband Michael seemed like a decent man who treated her well and shared her ambitions for building a family. The baby shower was being held at the Garden Terrace restaurant in Palo Alto, an elegant venue with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a beautifully landscaped courtyard. Jessica had chosen the location specifically because it was perfect for introducing the new baby to our social circle, as she'd explained to me during one of our weekly phone calls. She'd spared no expense on the event. Designer decorations, in soft pastels and gold accents, a gourmet brunch menu featuring organic, locally sourced ingredients, professional photography to document every moment, and custom party favors that probably cost more per guest than most people spend on groceries in a week. The guest list was an interesting mix of Jessica's professional colleagues, her college sorority sisters, neighbors from her upscale Redwood city subdivision, and a few family members including myself, my other daughter Claire, and David's sister Patricia. Jessica had specifically requested that we keep the family presence minimal because she wanted the focus to be on her professional and social network. I arrived at the restaurant at exactly 11 a.m., the start time printed on the elegant invitations. Jessica had ordered from a boutique stationery company. The private dining room was already bustling with perfectly dressed women in their 30s and 40s, all holding mimosas and chatting animatedly about pregnancy experiences, baby gear recommendations, and nursery design trends. The first hour of the party unfolded exactly as you'd expect from a well-orchestrated social event. I mingled politely with Jessica's guests, sharing appropriate stories about her childhood when asked, and accepting compliments on the baby quilt I'd brought. Most of the women were pleasant enough, though there was an underlying competitiveness in their conversations about everything from stroller brands to preschool applications that reminded me why I'd always preferred smaller, more intimate family gatherings. "Mrs. Chen, it's so lovely to finally meet you," said a blonde woman named Victoria, introducing herself as Jessica's colleague from the strategic planning department. "Jessica talks about you all the time. She mentioned you used to work in law. That must have been fascinating." "I still practice law, actually," I replied with a warm smile. "Well, I'm semi-retired now. I maintain my own practice, but I've scaled back my caseload significantly over the past few years to enjoy more flexibility in my schedule." Victoria's perfectly styled eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, Jessica gave me the impression that that you'd fully retired due to health concerns. Something about the work becoming too stressful to manage?" Before I could ask Victoria. To clarify what Jessica had told her about my supposed health concerns, another guest approached our conversation. This was Amanda, a brunette woman in her early 30s wearing what appeared to be a very expensive maternity dress. "Margaret, right?" Amanda said, extending her hand. "I'm Amanda, Jessica's neighbor. We live just 3 houses down from each other in Willowbrook Estates. Jessica has mentioned that you're dealing with some challenges living alone in that big house. It must be such a relief to have a daughter who's so concerned about your well-being." Challenges, living alone, concerns about my well-being. I was beginning to sense a pattern in the information Jessica had been sharing about my supposed circumstances, and it wasn't matching my actual reality. "I'm sorry," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure what challenges Jessica thinks I'm having. I've been living independently in my home for 15 years since my husband passed away, and I've managed quite well." Amanda looked confused, glancing between Victoria and me as if she wasn't sure whether to pursue the topic further. "Oh, well, maybe I misunderstood. Jessica mentioned something about safety concerns and, well, perhaps it's not my place to discuss family matters." "What kind of safety concerns?" I asked, feeling the first flutter of unease in my stomach. Ladies! Jessica's voice suddenly rang out across the dining room, cutting through our conversation like a bell. "Could I have everyone's attention, please?" I turned toward my daughter, who was standing at the head of the beautifully decorated gift table, tapping a silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute. She was wearing a flowing lavender maternity dress that complemented her dark hair, which had been professionally styled for the occasion. Her makeup was flawless, and she was beaming with the kind of radiant happiness that expectant mothers are supposed to embody. "Thank you all so much for being here today to celebrate this amazing new chapter in Michael's and my life," Jessica began, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Your presence here means the world to us, and I can't..." Wait for all of you to meet baby Chen when he or she arrives in March." The room filled with warm applause and congratulations. I found myself smiling despite my growing confusion about the conversations I'd just had with Victoria and Amanda. Whatever Jessica had been telling people about my circumstances, this was her moment, and I didn't want anything to overshadow her celebration. "Now, I have some absolutely wonderful news to share with all of you," Jessica continued, her smile growing even brighter. "And it involves someone very special to me, my mother, Margaret." Every eye in the room turned toward me, and I felt my cheeks warm with the kind of attention that comes from being unexpectedly spotlighted in a group setting. I smiled politely and gave a small wave, assuming Jessica was about to thank me for something, or perhaps mention the baby quilt I'd made. "As many of you know," Jessica went on, "my mother has been living alone in her big house in San Mateo for the past 15 years, ever since my father passed away. And while she's been incredibly independent for someone her age, our entire family has been getting more and more concerned about her safety and well-being as she's gotten older." The pleasant warmth in my cheeks was rapidly being replaced by a cold sensation creeping up my spine. Someone her age, safety, and well-being concerns. Our entire family, though I couldn't recall having any conversations with Jessica or her siblings about concerns regarding my independence. "Mom has been struggling with some memory issues lately," Jessica continued, her voice taking on the sympathetic tone people use when discussing elderly relatives. "And there have been several incidents that have really worried us. She's forgotten to turn off appliances, gotten confused about appointments, and last month she actually got lost driving to the grocery store she's been shopping at for 20 years. I stood frozen in place, champagne glass trembling in my hand, as Jessica continued describing a version of my life that bore no resemblance to reality. I had never forgotten to turn off appliances beyond the normal absent-mindedness that everyone experiences occasionally. I had never missed an appointment due to confusion. My calendar system was more organized than most people half my age, and I had certainly never gotten lost driving to any familiar location. Every single thing Jessica was saying about my supposed cognitive decline was completely fabricated. "We've also been worried about her managing her finances," Jessica added, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. "She's been making some questionable decisions about investments and has fallen for a few phone scams that cost her quite a bit of money. The whole family has been trying to figure out how to help her without hurting her pride. Phone scams. Questionable investment decisions. My portfolio had actually increased by 12% over the past year thanks to strategic property acquisitions and market timing that most professional investors would envy. I hadn't fallen for a single fraudulent scheme because I understood contract law better than the people trying to perpetrate them. Well, I'm thrilled to tell you all that we've finally found the perfect solution." Jessica's voice rang with triumph and relief. "After months of research, I found the most wonderful senior living community in Half Moon Bay called Sunset Manor. They specialize in memory care and assisted living, and they have an opening for Mom starting December 1st. The room erupted in enthusiastic applause and congratulatory murmurs. "How wonderful! What a devoted daughter! She must be so relieved to have that worry off her shoulders. I've heard such good things about that facility." I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience, watching myself stand in a room full of strangers who were celebrating the fact that my daughter had just announced my involuntary commitment to a nursing home. Jessica was accepting congratulations for solving the problem of my independence, based on a fictional narrative about my supposed cognitive decline and financial incompetence. And she had never, not once, discussed any of this with me. "The best part is that Mom won't have to worry about any of the complicated details," Jessica continued, clearly enjoying her moment in the spotlight. "I've handled all the paperwork, set up the financial arrangements, and even scheduled her intake appointment for this Thursday. All she has to do is pack a few personal items, and the transition team will take care of everything else. Intake appointment, financial arrangements, transition team," Jessica was talking about me like I was an incompetent person who needed to be managed rather than consulted. She was describing the dissolution of my independent life as if it were a gift she was giving me. "Mom, aren't you excited?" Jessica called out across the room, finally acknowledging my presence now that she'd finished making her grand announcement. "I know change can be scary at our age, but you're going to absolutely love Sunset Manor. They have all sorts of activities designed for people with memory issues, and you'll finally have the round-the-clock supervision you need to stay safe." Every person in that room, 30 successful, educated women, turned to look at me with expressions of benevolent sympathy mixed with relief that they weren't dealing with a similar family situation. They expected to see a grateful elderly woman, perhaps confused, but ultimately appreciative of her daughter's thoughtful planning for her decline. What they saw instead was someone whose face had gone completely white with shock and whose hands were gripping her champagne glass so tightly that her knuckles had turned the color of bone. What they saw was a woman who looked like she'd just received the most devastating news of her life rather than a wonderful gift. Because that's exactly what had happened. "Jessica," I managed to say, my voice barely audible above the continued congratulations and advice being offered by her guests. "I need to speak with you privately." "Oh, Mom, don't be shy," Jessica laughed, waving off my request with the kind of patronizing gesture you'd use to calm a nervous child. "Everyone here thinks this is wonderful news. There's absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. Getting older is perfectly natural, and needing help is nothing to be ashamed of." Getting older, needing help. As if turning 70 automatically meant losing the right to make decisions about your own life. "Jessica," I repeated, my voice gaining strength despite the emotional earthquake happening in my chest. "I need to speak with you privately. Right now." Something in my tone, perhaps the steel that had gotten me through 4 decades of complex, legal negotiations, finally penetrated Jessica's celebration mood. Her radiant smile faltered slightly, and for the first time all morning she looked at me with what might have been genuine attention rather than performative concern. "Ladies, please continue enjoying the brunch and opening gifts," she announced to her guests, her voice still bright but with an undertone of uncertainty. "Mom and I will be right back. Sometimes elderly parents need a little reassurance when facing big transitions." As Jessica led me toward a quiet alcove near the restaurant's windows, I caught snippets of conversation from her guests. "She seems a bit confused, poor thing. It's so hard when elderly parents resist what's clearly best for them." Jessica is being incredibly patient. "Memory issues make everything so much more difficult." Confused elderly parent. Memory issues. Resistance to what's best for me. In the span of 10 minutes, my daughter had successfully convinced 30 strangers that I was a cognitively impaired woman who lacked the capacity to make rational decisions about my own welfare. These people now believed that Margaret Chen, the woman who'd spent 45 years negotiating complex real estate transactions, building a multi-million-dollar property portfolio, and providing legal counsel to some of the most successful business owners in the San Francisco Bay Area, was someone who needed to be managed, supervised, and protected from her own supposedly poor judgment. But what Jessica didn't know, what she'd never bothered to learn despite 37 years of being my daughter, was that the confused old woman she'd just publicly committed to a nursing home was someone who understood contracts, property law, elder rights, and legal procedures better than most attorneys currently practicing in California. The daughter who thought she could announce major life decisions for her mother without consultation was about to discover exactly what happens when you underestimate someone whose professional life had been built on protecting people's rights and property from exactly this kind of unauthorized interference. Jessica was about to learn that there's a significant legal difference between being someone's daughter and being someone's legal guardian. She was about to find out that making binding commitments about another adult's living arrangements without their knowledge or consent isn't family planning. It's potentially criminal behavior that could result in charges of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Most importantly, she was about to discover that announcing someone's involuntary institutionalization in front of 30 witnesses might just be the kind of public humiliation that transforms a patient, loving mother into someone who decides that legal consequences are exactly what the situation requires. The phone call to my attorney was going to be very interesting indeed. Jessica guided me toward a small seating area near the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, where 2 plush armchairs were positioned around a small glass table decorated with fresh orchids. The view overlooked the garden terrace's beautifully landscaped courtyard, where autumn sunlight filtered through Japanese maple trees in brilliant shades of red and gold. Under different circumstances, it would have been a peaceful, lovely spot for a private conversation between mother and daughter. But these weren't different circumstances. These were circumstances where my 37-year-old daughter had just announced to a room full of strangers that she was committing me to a nursing home based on fabricated claims about my mental capacity without bothering to consult me about decisions affecting my own life. "Mom, please sit down," Jessica said, her voice taking on the gentle, patient tone that people use when speaking to confused elderly relatives or upset children. "I can see that you're feeling overwhelmed by all this attention, but I want you to know that everything is going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. It's going to be wonderful." I remained standing, my hands still gripping the champagne flute that I'd somehow managed not to shatter despite the trembling that had taken over my entire body. Through the windows, I could see other diners enjoying their Saturday brunch in the main restaurant, their conversations and laughter a stark contrast to the emotional earthquake that was destroying my world. One revelation at a time. "Jessica," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest, "I need you to explain to me exactly what you think you've just done." "What I've done is solve a problem that's been keeping our entire family awake at night," Jessica replied, settling into one of the armchairs and gesturing for me to join her. "Mom, we've all been so worried about you living alone in that big house, especially after some of the incidents we've discussed." "What incidents?" I asked. "Jessica, I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't had any incidents that would suggest I need supervised care. I haven't had any problems that would indicate cognitive decline. Where are these stories coming from?" Jessica's expression softened into the kind of sympathetic concern that suggested she was dealing with someone who wasn't quite grasping reality. "Mom, I know it's hard to acknowledge when we're struggling, especially for someone who's always been as independent as you. But we've all noticed the changes over the past year or two." "What changes, specifically?" "Well, like last month when you called me 3 times in one day asking what time Claire's birthday dinner was, even though we'd discussed it multiple times. Or when you forgot that you'd already paid your electric bill and sent them a second payment. Or when you got confused about which exit to take when driving to my house and ended up 20 minutes late because you couldn't find the street." I stared at my daughter, trying to process what she'd just said. Every single example she'd given was either completely fabricated or a gross distortion of minor, normal occurrences that she'd somehow transformed into evidence of cognitive decline. The birthday dinner incident had never happened. I'd called Jessica once to confirm the restaurant name because I'd wanted to make sure I was dressed appropriately for the venue. The electric bill situation was also fictional. I had a very organized filing system and had never double-paid any utility bill in my life. As for getting lost driving to her house, I'd been exactly 3 minutes late to one dinner because of unexpected traffic on Highway 101, which I'd explained when I arrived. "Jessica, none of those things happened the way you're describing them," I said carefully. "The birthday dinner call was about the restaurant dress code. I've never double-paid a bill, and I was late to your house once because of traffic, not because I was lost." "Mom," Jessica said, her tone becoming even more gentle and concerned, "this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're remembering these situations differently than they actually happened. That's one of the early signs that Dr. Patel mentioned when I spoke with her about my concerns. Dr. Patel, my primary care physician of 15 years, who had never expressed any concerns about my cognitive function during our regular appointments. When did you speak with Dr. Patel about me? I asked. A few months ago, when I went with you to your appointment, remember? I asked her about the memory issues we'd been noticing, and she explained that sometimes families are the first to recognize changes that patients themselves don't notice. I did remember that appointment. Jessica had surprised me by asking to attend, claiming she wanted to be more involved in my healthcare as I got older. During the visit, she'd asked Dr. Patel a few general questions about aging and memory, but Dr. Patel had conducted her usual thorough examination and pronounced me in excellent health for my age. There had been no discussion of memory issues or cognitive concerns. But now I understood what had happened. Jessica had taken Dr. Patel's general educational comments about aging and memory and twisted them into validation for concerns that didn't actually exist. She'd interpreted routine medical information as confirmation of problems she'd invented. Jessica, Dr. Patel never expressed concerns about my memory or cognitive function. She said I was in excellent health and that my mind was sharp. You're misrepresenting what happened during that appointment. Mom, you're getting upset, and I understand why. Change is scary, especially when it involves admitting that we need help. But I've done so much research on this, and everything I've learned says that denial is a completely normal part of the process. Denial. Jessica was now interpreting my accurate recollection of events as psychological denial of my supposed cognitive decline. She'd created a perfect closed loop where any disagreement with her assessment became additional evidence supporting her conclusions. What research? I asked. What process? Research on age-related cognitive decline and the transition to assisted living. I've been reading about it for months, Mom. I've talked to social workers, toured facilities, consulted with geriatric care specialists. I even joined an online support group for adult children dealing with aging parents who need more supervision. Support. Group for adult children dealing with aging parents. Jessica had been treating my supposed decline as if it were an established fact, seeking help for a problem that existed only in her imagination. Jessica, I want you to listen to me very carefully, I said, finally sitting down in the chair across from her. I am not experiencing cognitive decline. I do not need assisted living. I have not had any incidents that would suggest I'm unsafe living independently. Every example you just gave me is either completely false or a significant distortion of normal, minor situations. Mom, I know you believe that. I don't believe it, Jessica. I know it. Just like I know that you've just committed me to a nursing home without my knowledge or consent, which is not only morally wrong, but potentially illegal. Something in my tone must have finally penetrated Jessica's protective bubble of certainty, because her expression shifted slightly. For just a moment, she looked less like someone patiently managing a confused elderly relative, and more like someone who might be questioning her own assumptions. Illegal, she repeated. Yes, illegal. Adults have the right to make their own decisions about where they live and how they receive care, regardless of their age. The only exception is when they've been legally declared incompetent by a court of law after proper evaluation and due process. Has that happened to me, Jessica? Well, no. But then you have no legal authority to make binding commitments about my living arrangements. You certainly have no right to announce those commitments to a room full of people as if they were established facts. What you've done today could constitute fraud, elder abuse, or conspiracy, depending on what financial arrangements you've made with this facility. Jessica's face had gone pale. Mom, I wasn't trying to do anything illegal. I was trying to help you. The intake coordinator at Sunset Manor said that families often need to take the initiative because elderly people frequently resist transitions that are clearly in their best interest. The intake coordinator told you that families should make commitments without consulting the actual person who would be living there? She said that sometimes adult children need to provide guidance and structure for the decision-making process when elderly parents are having trouble processing complex information. I felt a cold anger building in my chest, not just at Jessica, but at the entire system that had apparently convinced her that she had the right to override my autonomy because of my age. Some intake coordinator at a nursing home had given my daughter permission to treat me like a child who couldn't be trusted, to make my own decisions. Jessica, let me ask you something. Have you signed any contracts or agreements with Sunset Manor on my behalf? Well, I filled out some preliminary paperwork and put down a deposit to hold the room, but nothing final. You put down a deposit using what money? Jessica hesitated. I used the credit card you gave me for emergencies. The emergency credit card. 2 years ago, when Jessica was going through a difficult period with Michael and their finances were tight, I'd given her a credit card connected to one of my accounts so she could handle unexpected expenses related to the children or genuine emergencies. It was supposed to be for situations like medical bills or car repairs, not for making unauthorized deposits at nursing homes. How much was the deposit? $5,000, but Mom, it's fully refundable if you decide not to. Jessica, you used my money to make a deposit for a nursing home placement that I never agreed to, based on medical claims that are false, after lying to the intake coordinator about my mental capacity. Do you understand what you've done? I haven't lied about anything. Jessica's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from some of her guests who were seated at nearby tables. I've been honestly reporting the concerns that our family has discussed. What family discussions? When? Has our family discussed my supposed cognitive decline? When have my other children expressed concerns about my independence? Jessica's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. Because there hadn't been any family discussions. Claire and David Jr. had never expressed concerns about my mental capacity because they interacted with me regularly and knew I was perfectly competent. Jessica, have you discussed these supposed concerns with Claire or David? Well, not specifically, but have you talked to them at all about your plan to put me in a nursing home? I was going to tell them after everything was arranged. I didn't want to worry them unnecessarily if I could handle the situation myself. Handle the situation. As if my independence were a situation that needed to be handled rather than a right that needed to be respected. Jessica, I need you to understand something. What you've done today isn't family planning or elder care or helping your aging mother. What you've done is attempted to defraud me and potentially commit elder abuse. You've made false statements about my mental capacity, used my money without authorization, and created binding commitments in my name without my knowledge or consent. Mom, you're being paranoid. I'm being accurate. And if you think I'm being paranoid now, wait until you see what happens when I call my attorney on Monday morning. The word attorney seemed to hit Jessica like a physical blow. Her face went from pale to white, and she leaned back in her chair as if she were trying to put physical distance between herself and the implications of what I'd just said. Mom, there's no need to involve lawyers. This is a family matter. We can work this out ourselves. Jessica, you've just publicly announced that you're institutionalizing me based on false medical claims and unauthorized financial commitments. This stopped being a family matter the moment you made it a legal matter. I was trying to help you. You were trying to control me. And you picked the wrong person to try to control. Jessica stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her processing something she'd apparently never considered before. The possibility that I wasn't the confused, declining old woman she'd convinced herself I'd become. Mom, what do you mean? I picked the wrong person? It was time for Jessica to start learning exactly who she'd been underestimating for the past 2 years. I mean that the confused elderly woman you just announced you're putting in a nursing home spent 45 years practicing law in this state. I mean that I understand contracts, elder rights, fiduciary responsibility, and fraud better than most attorneys currently practicing. I mean that I have resources and connections you've apparently never bothered to learn about. Jessica's eyes widened. Mom, I know you used to practice law, but you've been retired for years, and things change. I haven't been retired, Jessica. I've been semi-retired, which means I maintain my bar certification, keep up with continuing education requirements, and still handle select cases for clients who specifically request my services. Last month, I closed a $15 million commercial real estate transaction. 3 weeks ago, I successfully defended a widow against a conservatorship petition filed by her stepchildren who wanted to gain control of her assets. The blood had completely drained from Jessica's face. I didn't know you were still practicing. You didn't know because you never asked. You assumed that because I'm 70 years old, I must be declining and incompetent. You created a narrative about my supposed limitations without bothering to verify whether that narrative matched reality. But the incidents I mentioned are fiction, Jessica. Pure fiction. And when my attorney investigates this situation, that's exactly what we're going to be able to prove. Every phone call you claim I made, every bill you say I confused, every time you assert I was lost or confused, we're going to examine the evidence, and we're going to discover that none of it happened the way you've described. Jessica was now gripping the arms of her chair the way I'd been gripping my champagne glass earlier. The confident daughter who'd been managing her confused mother had been replaced by someone who was beginning to understand that she might have made a catastrophic error in judgment. Mom, if there's been a misunderstanding, there's been no misunderstanding, Jessica. There's been a deliberate campaign to undermine my independence and autonomy. You've systematically presented false information about my mental capacity to medical professionals, social workers, and now 30 people at your baby shower. You've used my money to make unauthorized commitments to a nursing home. You've attempted to make binding decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent. I can cancel the appointment. You can cancel the appointment, return my money, and hope that I decide not to pursue legal action against you. But the damage to my reputation and the violation of my rights can't be undone quite so easily. Jessica began to cry, not the gentle tears of someone who was emotionally moved, but the desperate crying of someone who was beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. Mom, I never meant for any of this to hurt you. I honestly thought I was helping. I thought you were struggling and too proud to ask for help. Jessica, even if I had been struggling, which I'm not, what gave you the right to make decisions about my life without consulting me? What made you think that lying about my mental capacity was an appropriate way to help me? I don't know, she whispered. I guess I thought that because I'm your daughter, and because I love you, I had the right to make decisions that I believed were in your best interest. You thought wrong, and now you're going to learn exactly how wrong you were. Through the windows behind Jessica, I could see the other guests at her baby shower continuing their celebration, opening gifts and taking photos and enjoying their elegant brunch. They had no idea that the guest of honor was sitting in an alcove, receiving what might be the most expensive education of her life. What are you going to do? Jessica asked, her voice barely audible. I'm going to call my attorney first thing Monday morning. I'm going to have her investigate every claim you've made about my mental capacity and every financial commitment you've made in my name. I'm going to explore my legal options for protecting myself against future attempts to undermine my autonomy. And I'm going to make sure that you understand the legal and financial consequences of attempting to defraud someone who happens to know more about elder law than you've apparently learned in your 37 years on this planet. Jessica was now crying so hard that other guests were beginning to notice. Through the archway separating our alcove from the main dining room, I could see her friends and colleagues starting to whisper among themselves and glance in our direction. Mom, please. Can't we work this out as a family? Jessica, you made this a legal matter when you used my credit card to make unauthorized commitments and lied about my mental capacity to justify those commitments. You made this a public matter when you announced your plans to 30 people without my knowledge or consent. You can't unmake those choices by asking me to handle this as a private family disagreement. But what about the baby? Jessica said, placing her hand on her abdomen. What about your grandchild? Don't you want to be part of this baby's life? The manipulation was so blatant, so desperate, and so revealing that I felt my anger crystallize into something cold and strategic. She was now trying to use my future grandchild as leverage to avoid the consequences of her actions. Jessica, what I want is for my grandchild to grow up understanding that all people, including elderly people, deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. What I want is for my grandchild to learn that love doesn't give you the right to override someone else's autonomy. What I want is for my grandchild to have a mother who understands the difference between helping someone and controlling them. Mom. And what I definitely want is for my grandchild to never be in a position where someone they trust lies about their mental capacity and tries to institutionalize them without their consent. Jessica stared at me in silence, tears streaming down her face, finally beginning to understand that her actions had consequences beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd started down this path. Now, I continued, standing up from my chair, I'm going to leave your party. You're going to tell your guests that I had a sudden headache and needed to go home to rest. You're going to cancel that intake appointment immediately. You're going to return every penny of my money that you've spent on this nursing home scheme. And then you're going to wait for my attorney to contact you about what happens next. Mom, please don't leave like this. Can't we at least finish talking? We've finished talking, Jessica. Everything else will be handled through proper legal channels. I walked back into the main dining room, where 30 women were still celebrating Jessica's pregnancy and discussing the wonderful news about her mother's transition to assisted living. As I passed the gift table, I picked up the baby quilt I'd spent 3 months creating, folding it carefully and tucking it under my arm. Several guests approached me as I made my way toward the exit. Mrs. Chen, are you feeling all right? Asked Victoria, Jessica's colleague from the strategic planning department. I'm feeling perfectly fine, I replied with a smile. I'm just going home to make some phone calls. Oh, how exciting! Calling to make arrangements for your move to Sunset Manor? No, I said, my smile becoming more genuine. Calling to make arrangements with my attorney. And with that, I walked out of the Garden Terrace restaurant, leaving behind a baby shower full of people who thought they'd been celebrating good news about family planning and elder care when they'd actually been witnessing the opening act of a legal drama that would teach everyone involved exactly why you should never underestimate someone's capabilities based on their age. The parking valet brought my car around, a pristine silver Mercedes E-Class that I'd purchased 2 years ago when my previous vehicle needed replacing. It was a practical, reliable luxury car that reflected my financial success without being ostentatious. And it was certainly not the vehicle of someone who needed supervised living arrangements. As I drove home through the winding roads of San Mateo County, I thought about the phone calls I would be making. First to my attorney, Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in elder law and had successfully defended dozens of clients against exactly the kind of attempted financial exploitation Jessica had just attempted. Then to my other children, to make sure they understood what their sister had done and why it could never be allowed to happen again. But mostly, I thought about the moment when Jessica would finally understand that the confused old woman she'd been patronizing and managing was actually someone who could destroy her financially, legally, and professionally with a few well-placed phone calls. The student was about to become the teacher, and the lesson was going to be unforgettable. The drive home from Palo Alto to my house in San Mateo gave me exactly the time I needed to process what had just happened and begin formulating my response. The familiar route along Highway 101, past the rolling hills dotted with California oaks and the sprawling tech campuses that had transformed the South Bay over the past decades, usually provided a calming transition between the different parts of my life. Today, it served as a buffer zone between the shock of discovery and the clarity of action. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had moved beyond the emotional devastation of Jessica's betrayal and entered the analytical mindset that had served me well throughout 4 decades of complex legal negotiations. This wasn't just a family crisis anymore. It was a case, and I was going to handle it with the same professional competence I'd brought to defending other people's rights and property. My house sat on a quiet, tree-lined street in one of San Mateo's most desirable neighborhoods, a 1960s Spanish-style home that David and I had purchased for $78,000 in 1981. The neighborhood had transformed over the years from solidly middle class to genuinely affluent, and our modest 3-bedroom home was now worth nearly $2.8 million. Despite being one of the smaller properties on the block, I'd updated and maintained it meticulously over the decades, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I believed in taking care of valuable assets. This was the house where Jessica thought I was having incidents that demonstrated my declining capacity to live independently. This was the property she'd described to 30 strangers as being too big and dangerous for me to manage on my own. As I walked up the perfectly maintained front walkway, past the garden beds I'd redesigned myself just 6 months ago, I wondered how anyone could look at my home and see evidence of an elderly woman who couldn't take care of herself. The interior was immaculate, organized, and efficiently arranged for comfortable single living. Every system in the house, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, security, had been updated within the past 5 years. My home office was equipped with state-of-the-art technology that allowed me to research legal precedents, draft contracts, and communicate with clients as effectively as any attorney half my age. This was not the residence of someone who needed supervised living arrangements. I placed the baby quilt I'd retrieved from Jessica's party on the dining room table and walked directly to my office, where I kept the files and contact information I'd need for what was about to become a very busy week. The afternoon light streaming through my office windows illuminated the law school diplomas, professional certifications, and awards that documented a career Jessica had apparently decided was irrelevant ancient history. My first call was to Rebecca Martinez, my attorney and longtime colleague who specialized in elder law and had successfully defended dozens of clients against exactly the kind of attempted exploitation Jessica had just perpetrated. Rebecca and I had known each other for 20 years, first as opposing counsel on various real estate transactions, later as collaborators on complex cases involving property rights and fiduciary responsibility. Rebecca Martinez Law Office, this is Patricia speaking. Patricia, this is Margaret Chen. I need to speak with Rebecca immediately regarding an urgent elder abuse situation. Oh my goodness, Mrs. Chen, are you all right? Is someone threatening you? I'm fine, Patricia, but I need Rebecca's advice about a situation involving my own daughter that could require immediate legal intervention. Let me get her for you right away. Within 30 seconds, Rebecca's familiar voice came on the line. Margaret, what's happening? Patricia said something about elder abuse? Rebecca, I need you to sit down. I'm about to describe a situation that's going to make you very angry on my behalf, and I need you to help me figure out the best way to handle it legally. Over the next 20 minutes, I walked Rebecca through everything that had happened at Jessica's baby shower. The public announcement about my supposed cognitive decline, the false claims about incidents that had never occurred, the unauthorized use of my credit card to make deposits at a nursing home, and the complete lack of consultation about decisions affecting my own life. Rebecca's responses progressed from professional concern to outrage to what I could only describe as prosecutorial excitement. Margaret, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of attempted elder abuse I've encountered in my practice. Your daughter has committed multiple violations of both civil and criminal law. Walk me through the specific charges we could pursue. Elder abuse under California Welfare and Institutions Code 15610, which includes both physical abuse and financial abuse. Financial abuse of an elder, which is a felony when it involves more than $950. Fraud, conspiracy, identity theft if she signed any documents in your name, and potentially conservatorship abuse if she's been making false statements to medical professionals about your mental capacity. I felt a grim satisfaction hearing the legal framework that applied to Jessica's actions. This wasn't just a family disagreement or a misunderstanding about my care needs. This was criminal behavior that could result in serious legal consequences. What's our first step? We need to document everything immediately. I want you to call Sunset Manor right now and find out exactly what your daughter told them about your mental state and what commitments she made in your name. Record that conversation if California's single-party consent law allows it, which it does. Then I want you to contact your bank and get documentation of the credit card charges she made without your authorization. What about the public announcement she made at the baby shower? That's actually one of our strongest pieces of evidence. She made false statements about your mental capacity in front of 30 witnesses, which demonstrates both the systematic nature of her deception and her complete disregard for your dignity and reputation. We'll want to get written statements from some of those witnesses about exactly what she said. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. I don't just want to stop Jessica from pursuing this nursing home plan. I want to make sure this never happens again. I want her to understand that there are serious consequences for attempting to undermine someone's autonomy based on false claims about their mental capacity. Margaret, I've known you for 20 years, and I've never seen you back down from a fight when principle was involved. What level of legal response are you thinking about? I'm thinking about whatever level is necessary to ensure that Jessica and anyone else who might consider similar actions understand that I am not someone to be trifled with. I'm 70 years old, not dead. I'm semi-retired, not incompetent. And I'm apparently dealing with a daughter who needs a very expensive education about respecting other people's rights. I love it. Let's start with the documentation, and then we'll discuss our options for both civil and criminal remedies. After ending the call with Rebecca, I immediately dialed the number for Sunset Manor, the nursing home where Jessica had apparently made unauthorized commitments in my name. I wanted to understand exactly what she'd told them about my situation and what financial obligations she'd created. Sunset Manor, this is Jennifer speaking. How can I help you? Jennifer, this is Margaret Chen. I understand that my daughter Jessica Chen Morrison has been in contact with your facility about potential residence arrangements for me. Oh, Mrs. Chen, yes, I'm so glad you're calling. Jessica has told us so. Much about you, and we're all looking forward to welcoming you to our community. How are you feeling about the transition? The transition. As if my move to their facility were an established fact rather than an unauthorized plan I'd learned about 30 minutes ago. Jennifer, I need to clarify something immediately. I have never authorized my daughter or anyone else to make arrangements for me to live at your facility. I have never expressed interest in moving to assisted living. I was not even aware that these discussions were taking place until my daughter announced them publicly today. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, but I'm confused. Jessica told us that you had been struggling with memory issues and that you'd asked her to help you find appropriate care. She said you were sometimes resistant to change, but that you understood the need for more supervision. Jennifer, I need you to understand that every statement my daughter made about my mental capacity, my living situation, and my need for supervision is false. I am mentally competent, I live independently, without any problems, and I have never asked anyone to arrange assisted living for me. But she put down a deposit and filled out all the intake paperwork. She said you had episodes of confusion and that your family was concerned about safety issues. She used my credit card without authorization to make that deposit, and everything she told you about my mental state is fabricated. I'm calling to inform you that I will not be moving to your facility, that any commitments made in my name are unauthorized and invalid, and that I expect a full refund of any money taken from my accounts. Mrs. Chen, this is very unusual. We've never had a situation where family members misrepresented an elder's condition or made unauthorized commitments. I'm going to need to speak with my supervisor and review our protocols for this kind of situation. Jennifer, while you're speaking. With your supervisor, I want you to understand that I am an attorney with 45 years of experience in California law. The statements my daughter made to your facility about my mental capacity constitute fraud. The financial commitments she made without my authorization constitute elder abuse. Your facility's acceptance of those commitments without proper verification of my consent could potentially make you complicit in those crimes. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that I wondered if Jennifer had hung up. Mrs. Chen, let me transfer you to our Director of Admissions immediately. I think this is something she needs to handle personally. That's an excellent idea. The Director of Admissions, a woman named Carol Stevens, came on the line within minutes. Her voice carried the careful professionalism of someone who had just been briefed on a potential legal nightmare. Mrs. Chen, I apologize for any confusion regarding your daughter's communications with our facility. We take these matters very seriously, and I want to make sure we understand the situation correctly. Carol, the situation is very straightforward. My daughter has made false statements about my mental capacity and unauthorized financial commitments in my name. I want those commitments canceled immediately, and I want full documentation of everything she told your staff about my supposed condition. Of course, I'm looking at Jessica's file right now, and I can see that she described several incidents that suggested you were having difficulty with memory and judgment. She also indicated that you had asked her to explore care options because you were worried about living alone. Carol, I need you to write down exactly what I'm telling you, because this conversation is being recorded for legal purposes. Every statement my daughter made about my mental capacity is false. Every incident she described either never happened or was grossly distorted. I never asked her to explore care options, and I never expressed concerns about living alone. Mrs. Chen, this is very serious. If what you're saying is accurate, then we've been given false information about a potential resident's condition, which could expose our facility to significant liability. It could indeed. And Carol, I want you to understand that I'm not just any concerned family member calling to complain. I'm a practicing attorney who specializes in real estate and property law, and I have colleagues who specialize in elder abuse cases. What my daughter has done to me and what your facility has potentially facilitated could result in both civil and criminal legal action. What can we do to resolve this situation appropriately? First, you can cancel any arrangements made in my name and return every penny of my money that was used without authorization. Second, you can provide me with complete documentation of all communications with my daughter, including notes about what she told your staff regarding my mental state. Third, you can review your intake procedures to make sure this kind of fraud doesn't happen to other families. Mrs. Chen, I'm authorizing the immediate return of your deposit, and I'll have our accounting department expedite that refund. I'm also going to have our legal department review this situation to determine what additional steps we should take. Carol, that's exactly the kind of professional response I was hoping for. I appreciate your facility's cooperation in resolving this matter appropriately. After ending the call with Sunset Manor, I felt the first surge of satisfaction since leaving Jessica's baby shower. Within one phone conversation, I'd accomplished several important objectives. I'd established that Jessica's claims about my condition were false. I'd recovered my money. I'd created a paper trail documenting her fraud. And I'd put a legitimate business on notice that they'd been used as part of an elder abuse scheme. But I was just getting started. My next call was to Bank of America, where I needed to document the unauthorized charges Jessica had made and explore my options for protecting my accounts against future misuse. Bank of America Customer Service, this is Michael. How can I help you today? Michael, this is Margaret Chen. I need to report unauthorized use of a credit card by someone who had legitimate access to the account but exceeded their authorization. I can definitely help you with that, Mrs. Chen. Can you give me the details of the unauthorized charges? The card was given to my daughter for emergency use only, but she used it to make a $5,000 deposit at a nursing home without my knowledge or consent. I need to dispute that charge and remove her access to the account. I'm showing a charge to Sunset Manor for $5,000 on October 28th. Is that the charge you're referring to? That's correct. I want to dispute that charge as unauthorized use, and I want to immediately remove Jessica Chen Morrison's access to all of my accounts. Mrs. Chen, since your daughter was an authorized user on the account, this situation might be more complicated than a standard fraud dispute. Can you explain why you consider this charge to be unauthorized? I spent the next 15 minutes explaining the situation to Michael, who escalated my call to a supervisor, who then transferred me to the bank's elder abuse prevention specialist. By the end of that conversation, I had successfully disputed the charge, removed Jessica's access to all my accounts, and received information about additional security measures I could implement to prevent future unauthorized access. The bank's elder abuse specialist, a woman named Sarah Rodriguez, was particularly helpful in explaining my options. Mrs. Chen, based on what you've described, this appears to be a clear case of financial elder abuse. We see these situations more often than you might expect, and unfortunately, family members are the perpetrators in about 60% of cases. What's the bank's standard procedure for handling these situations? We file a report with the appropriate authorities, implement additional security measures on your accounts, and provide documentation to support any legal action you might choose to pursue. We also offer resources for counseling and legal assistance, though it sounds like you have that covered. Sarah, I appreciate the bank's concern, but I want to be clear that I'm not a typical victim of elder abuse. I'm an attorney with extensive experience in handling these kinds of legal matters. What I need from the bank is thorough documentation and full cooperation with any investigation that might result from this situation. Of course, Mrs. Chen, I'll make sure that all relevant documentation is preserved and available for legal proceedings. By late afternoon, I had accomplished everything on my initial list. I'd consulted with my attorney, canceled Jessica's unauthorized nursing home arrangements, recovered my money, documented her fraudulent statements, and secured my financial accounts against future misuse. But I wasn't finished. I needed to understand the full scope of what Jessica had been telling people about my supposed decline, and I needed to make sure that the false narrative she'd created was corrected before it caused additional damage to my reputation and relationships. My first call was to Dr. Patel, my primary care physician, to find out exactly what Jessica had discussed with her during my last appointment. Dr. Patel's office. This is Nancy. Nancy, this is Margaret Chen. I need to speak with Dr. Patel about some concerns regarding my last appointment when my daughter accompanied me. Oh, hello, Mrs. Chen. Let me check if Dr. Patel is available to speak with you. Dr. Patel came on the line within a few minutes, her voice warm with the familiarity of our 15-year doctor-patient relationship. Margaret, how are you feeling? Is everything all right? Dr. Patel, I'm calling because I've discovered that my daughter has been misrepresenting our conversations during my last appointment. She's been telling people that you expressed concerns about my memory and cognitive function. I need to know exactly what was discussed and what you actually told her. Margaret, I'm confused. I never expressed any concerns about your cognitive function. During your last appointment, your daughter asked some general questions about aging and memory, and I provided educational information about normal aging processes. But I specifically noted in your chart that your mental acuity was excellent and that you showed no signs of cognitive decline. Dr. Patel, my daughter has been using your supposed concerns about my mental capacity to justify putting me in a nursing home without my consent. She announced at a public event today that you had validated her concerns about my memory issues. Margaret, that's completely false. You are one of my most mentally sharp patients regardless of age. I would never suggest that you need supervised care or assisted living. If your daughter is claiming that I expressed such concerns, she is seriously misrepresenting our conversation. Would you be willing to document that in writing? Absolutely. I'll prepare a letter confirming your excellent cognitive health and stating clearly that I have never recommended assisted living or expressed concerns about your ability to live independently. Dr. Patel, I want you to know that I'm consulting with an attorney about potential legal action against my daughter for elder abuse. Your documentation of my actual mental state will be crucial evidence in that case. Margaret, I'm sorry you're dealing with this situation, but I want you to know that you have my full support. What your daughter is describing is not only false, but potentially very damaging to elderly people who might actually need help, but are afraid to seek it because of stigma. Thank you, Dr. Patel. I appreciate your support and your willingness to provide accurate documentation. After ending the call with Dr. Patel, I realized that Jessica's deception was even more systematic than I'd initially understood. She hadn't just lied about specific incidents. She deliberately misrepresented professional medical opinions to support her false narrative about my decline. But there was still one more group of people I needed to contact: my other children. Claire and David Jr. needed to understand what their sister had done and why it could never be allowed to happen again. I called Claire first. She was 34, a successful architect living in Seattle with her husband and 2 young children. Claire had always been the most emotionally mature of my 3 children, and I knew she would understand the seriousness of Jessica's actions. Mom, hi. How was Jessica's baby shower? I'm sorry I couldn't make it down for the event. Claire, I need to tell you about something very serious that happened today, and I need you to listen carefully. I spent the next 20 minutes describing Jessica's public announcement, her false claims about my mental capacity, and the unauthorized financial commitments she'd made in my name. Claire's responses progressed from confusion to shock to anger. Mom, that's insane. Jessica actually told a room full of people that you were moving to a nursing home without even discussing it with you first? She did, and she's been telling people for months that I'm having memory problems and cognitive decline, none of which is true. Mom, I talk to you every week. You're sharper than most people half your age. How could Jessica possibly think you need supervised care? Claire, I don't think Jessica believes I need supervised care. I think Jessica wants me in supervised care because it would make her life more convenient. She wouldn't have to worry about my independence or my opinions about her choices. Mom, what are you going to do? I'm consulting with an attorney about potential legal action. What Jessica has done constitutes elder abuse under California law, and there need to be consequences for her actions. Do you want me to talk to her? No. Claire, this is beyond the point where family conversations are going to resolve anything. Jessica used my money without authorization and made false statements about my mental capacity to justify putting me in a nursing home. That's criminal behavior, and it needs to be handled through legal channels. Mom, I support whatever decision you make. What Jessica did is wrong, and if legal action is what it takes to make sure it doesn't happen again, then that's what needs to happen. My conversation with David Jr. followed a similar pattern, though his response was even more forceful than Claire's. Mom, I can't believe Jessica would do something so manipulative and cruel. She knows how important your independence is to you, and she knows you're perfectly capable of taking care of yourself. David, what concerns me most is that she was willing to lie about my mental capacity to multiple people over a period of months. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a systematic campaign to undermine my autonomy. Mom, do you want me to fly down there? I can be on a plane tonight if you need support dealing with this. I appreciate the offer, David, but I'm handling this situation through my attorney. What I need from you and Claire is your support for whatever legal action I decide to pursue. You have it, 100%. By evening, I had spoken with my attorney, the nursing home, my bank, my doctor, and both of my other children. I had documented Jessica's fraud, recovered my money, secured my accounts, obtained medical verification of my mental competence, and ensured that my family understood the seriousness of the situation. But most importantly, I had moved beyond the emotional devastation of Jessica's betrayal and into the strategic mindset that would guide my response to her actions. Jessica had made a catastrophic error in judgment when she decided to treat me like a confused old woman who could be managed and manipulated without consequences. She was about to discover exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who understands the law, has the resources to enforce it, and possesses the determination to make sure that violations of basic human dignity are met with appropriate consequences. The education was about to begin, and it was going to be very expensive indeed. To understand how completely Jessica had misjudged her mother, you need to know who Margaret Chen really was before grief and her daughter's systematic manipulation had convinced her to keep her accomplishments quiet. You need to understand the woman who'd built a legal career and property empire so methodically and successfully that even her own daughter had no idea what she was dealing with when she decided to treat her mother like an incompetent burden. Story didn't begin at 70 as a widowed retiree supposedly struggling with cognitive decline. It began at 25 as Margaret Wong, a young woman with a law degree from UC Berkeley, and fierce determination to succeed in a profession that wasn't particularly welcoming to women, especially Asian American women, in 1978. The Margaret that Jessica had never bothered to understand was someone who'd learned to be resilient not by choice, but by necessity. When I graduated from law school, there were exactly 3 women in my class of 120 students, and I was the only one who wasn't from a wealthy family with connections in the legal profession. I found my first job through persistence and competence, rather than networking and privilege. Miss Wong, Harold Steinberg had said during my interview at Steinberg & Associates, one of San Francisco's most respected real estate law firms, I'll be honest with you, we've never hired a woman attorney before, and we certainly haven't hired any Oriental lawyers. But your academic record is exceptional. And Professor Martinez at Berkeley says you have the best understanding of property law she's seen in 20 years of teaching. Professor Martinez had been right. I did understand property law with an intuitive clarity that surprised even me. While other students struggled with the complexities of zoning regulations, easement rights, and commercial real estate transactions, I found the logic of property ownership and transfer as natural as breathing. Real estate law wasn't just academic theory to me. It was the foundation upon which people built their lives, their security, and their dreams. Mr. Steinberg, I'd replied, I'm not asking you to hire me because I'm a woman or despite being a woman. I'm asking you to hire me because I'm better at real estate law than anyone else you're likely to interview. It was a bold statement for a 25-year-old recent graduate to make to one of the most established attorneys in Northern California. It was also completely accurate. Harold Steinberg gave me a chance, starting me as a junior associate handling routine title searches and basic property transfers. But within 6 months, I was researching complex zoning disputes and drafting purchase agreements for million-dollar commercial transactions. Within a year, I was accompanying senior partners to client meetings and taking the lead on cases that other associates couldn't handle. Wong, Harold said during my first annual review, I've been practicing real estate law for 30 years, and I've never seen a natural instinct for property rights like yours. You understand how all the pieces fit together: zoning, financing, environmental regulations, tax implications, in a way that most attorneys never develop even after decades of practice. Thank you, Mr. Steinberg. I love this work. Every property transaction is like solving a puzzle where all the pieces have to align perfectly for the deal to close successfully. Well, keep solving puzzles like that, and you're going to have a very successful career. Harold was right about my career prospects, but he couldn't have predicted how my personal life would intersect with my professional success in ways that would shape the next 5 decades. I met David Chen in 1980 when I was representing a construction company in a complex development deal, and he was the project foreman responsible for ensuring that the buildings were constructed according to the specifications in our contracts. David was intelligent, hardworking, and possessed the kind of practical competence that perfectly complemented my theoretical knowledge of property law. Miss Wong, David had said after one of our project meetings, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to tell you that watching you negotiate that zoning variance was the most impressive thing I've seen in 10 years of construction work. You knew more about building codes than most of the engineers on this project. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I believe in understanding every aspect of the properties I represent, including the practical requirements for developing them successfully. Would you be interested in discussing property development over dinner sometime? I have some ideas about small residential projects that might benefit from your legal expertise. That dinner led to a business partnership that evolved into a romantic relationship that evolved into a marriage that would last 38 years. David understood construction and project management. I understood legal requirements and financial structuring. Together, we began investing in small residential properties that we could renovate and rent while building equity for our future. Our first investment property was a modest duplex in Redwood City that we purchased in 1982 for $95,000. David handled the renovations, updating the kitchens, improving the electrical systems, landscaping the yard, while I navigated the legal requirements for rental property ownership and tax optimization. Within 2 years, the property was worth $140,000 and generating rental income that covered our mortgage payments plus a small profit. Margaret, David said as we reviewed our first year's financial statements, if we can do this with one property, imagine what we could accomplish with 5 or 10 properties over the next decade. David, real estate investment isn't just about buying properties and hoping they appreciate. It's about understanding market trends, location dynamics, demographic shifts, and economic cycles. If we're going to build a portfolio, we need to be strategic about it. What kind of strategy are you thinking about? I'm thinking about focusing on specific geographic areas where we can become experts in local zoning laws, development potential, and neighborhood trends. I'm thinking about building relationships with contractors, property managers, and real estate agents who can help us identify opportunities before they become widely available. And I'm thinking about structuring our investments to maximize tax advantages while minimizing risk exposure. That conversation was the beginning of what would become a systematic approach to wealth building that combined David's practical construction knowledge with my legal and financial expertise. Over the next 15 years, while I built my reputation as one of the Bay Area's most skilled real estate attorneys, we quietly assembled a portfolio of rental properties that generated increasing income and equity. But our real breakthrough came in 1985, when Harold Steinberg made me a partner in his firm, and I began handling the largest commercial real estate transactions in Northern California. Margaret, Harold announced during the partners' meeting where my promotion was confirmed, you've brought in more new business in the past 3 years than any associate in the history of this firm. You've successfully closed transactions worth over $200 million, and you've developed a reputation for solving problems that other attorneys can't handle. Thank you, Harold. I love the complexity of commercial real estate. Every transaction teaches me something new about how property rights, financial structures, and business relationships intersect. Well, as a partner, you're going to have even more opportunities to handle complex deals. And of course, your compensation will reflect your contributions to the firm's success. My partnership at Steinberg & Associates meant that my annual income increased from a comfortable salary to substantial profit sharing that allowed David and me to accelerate our property investments significantly. But more importantly, it gave me access to information about emerging development opportunities, zoning changes, and market trends that most individual investors never encountered. Margaret, David said as we reviewed our investment strategy, in 1987, your insider knowledge of commercial development is giving us incredible advantages in residential property selection. You knew about the South Bay tech expansion 3 years before it became public knowledge. David, it's not insider knowledge. It's professional expertise applied to personal investing. When I negotiate commercial leases for technology companies, I learn about their expansion plans. When I handle zoning variances for residential developments, I understand which neighborhoods are positioned for growth. When I structure financing for major projects, I see which areas are attracting serious capital investment. So, what's our next move? Our next move is to start thinking bigger. Instead of buying single properties, we should start looking at small apartment buildings and mixed-use developments. Instead of focusing just on rental income, we should start considering development projects where we can add value through renovation and rezoning. The late 1980s and early 1990s were the golden years of our property investment strategy. The combination of my legal expertise, David's construction knowledge, and our growing capital base allowed us to identify and capitalize on opportunities that generated exceptional returns. We purchased a 6-unit apartment building in Mountain View for $680,000 in 1988. By 1992, after David's renovations and my successful rezoning application, it was worth $1.2 million and generating rental income that covered our mortgage payments on 3 other properties. But our most prescient investment decision came in 1991, when I recognized the long-term potential of the emerging internet technology sector and convinced David that we should focus our property investments on areas likely to benefit from tech industry expansion. "David," I said one evening as we reviewed market analyses I'd been conducting, "I think we're looking at the biggest economic transformation since the Industrial Revolution. These computer and software companies aren't just developing products, they're creating entirely new ways for people to work, communicate, and conduct business. Are you sure these technology companies are going to be successful long-term? Some of them seem pretty speculative." "Some of them are speculative, but the underlying trends are solid. Businesses are going to need more sophisticated computer systems. People are going to want better ways to access information and communicate electronically. And all of these technology workers are going to need places to live within commuting distance of their offices." "So you're thinking we should buy residential properties in areas where technology companies are expanding?" "I'm thinking we should buy properties in Palo Alto, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and San Jose before everyone else realizes that these cities are going to become the center of a massive economic boom." David trusted my judgment, as he always had. Over the next 5 years, we purchased 8 properties in what would eventually become known as Silicon Valley, paying prices that seemed high at the time but proved to be incredible bargains when the internet boom transformed the entire region's economy. By 1995, our real estate portfolio was worth over $3.2 million, and I was handling some of the largest commercial property transactions on the West Coast. I was representing major technology companies in their headquarters relocations, negotiating complex development deals for shopping centers and office parks, and structuring financing arrangements for clients whose business valuations were reaching unprecedented levels. "Margaret," said James Patterson, the CEO of a software company whose headquarters relocation I'd just negotiated, "you've saved us at least $2 million on this transaction through the zoning variances and tax incentives you structured. How did you know about municipal programs that even our accounting firm hadn't heard of?" "James, I make it my business to understand every legal mechanism that can benefit my clients' property transactions. Tax incentives, zoning bonuses, environmental credits, historic preservation benefits. There are dozens of programs available to commercial property owners, but you have to know how to find them and structure deals to qualify for them. Would you be interested in handling ongoing legal work for our company? We're expanding rapidly, and we need an attorney who understands both real estate and technology business requirements." That conversation led to retainer agreements with 3 major technology companies, which led to referrals from other tech executives, which eventually made me one of the most sought-after commercial real estate attorneys in Northern California. By the late 1990s, I was charging hourly rates that exceeded what most attorneys earned in entire months, and my client list included companies whose names would become household words during the internet boom. But our most dramatic financial success came during the dot-com expansion of 1998 to 2000, when our strategic property investments in Silicon Valley appreciated at rates that seemed almost surreal, even to someone who understood real estate markets as well as I did. "Margaret," David said one evening in 1999 as we reviewed our portfolio valuations, Our net worth has increased by $4.8 million in the past 2 years. I can barely comprehend numbers that large. David, we're benefiting from being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time with exactly the right expertise to capitalize on unprecedented economic growth. But we also need to be smart about protecting our gains if this boom cycle reverses. What do you mean? I mean that markets move in cycles, and what goes up dramatically can also come down dramatically. We should consider selling some properties to diversify our investments and lock in profits while prices are at their peak. Are you thinking the technology boom is going to end? I'm thinking that no market expansion continues indefinitely, and smart investors take profits when assets are overvalued rather than waiting for corrections to force them to sell at losses. David and I sold 4 properties between 1999 and 2000, generating profits that we invested in more stable assets, government bonds, blue-chip stocks, and commercial real estate in markets that weren't dependent on technology sector performance. When the dot-com crash of 2001-2002 devastated Silicon Valley property values, we had the capital to purchase distressed properties at significant discounts from desperate sellers. Margaret, David said as we reviewed acquisition opportunities. During the market crash, while other investors are panicking and selling at losses, we're positioned to buy quality properties at prices we couldn't have imagined 2 years ago. David, this is how generational wealth is built, through patient capital deployment, strategic market timing, and the discipline to act when others are paralyzed by fear or greed. By 2003, when the technology sector began its recovery, our real estate portfolio had not only survived the market crash, but had actually grown in both size and value. We owned 17 properties across Northern California, generating rental income that exceeded $40,000 per month and representing total equity of over $8.2 million. But the real foundation of our financial success wasn't just property investment. It was the legal expertise that allowed me to structure transactions, minimize taxes, and identify opportunities that other investors missed entirely. When we purchased a small office building in San Jose for $1.4 million in 2004, most people saw a dated property in need of significant renovation. I saw an opportunity to capitalize on historic preservation tax credits, energy efficiency incentives, and zoning bonuses that would reduce our acquisition costs by $300,000 while increasing the property's long-term value. Mrs. Chen, said the city planning official who approved our renovation permits, this is one of the most sophisticated redevelopment applications we've processed. You've identified funding sources and regulatory advantages that most commercial fee developers never discover. Thank you. I believe in understanding every aspect of the regulatory environment that affects property ownership and development. When we sold that property 5 years later for $3.1 million, the transaction generated not only substantial capital gains, but also provided us with tax advantages that offset income from our other properties. Every aspect of the deal, from acquisition financing to renovation planning to sales structuring, had been optimized to maximize financial benefits while minimizing risk exposure. Jessica was born in 1985, during the early years of our property investment strategy, and she grew up watching her parents build wealth through disciplined decision-making, strategic planning, and systematic execution of long-term financial goals. She saw us living modestly, despite our growing assets, choosing to reinvest profits rather than spend on luxury purchases that would impress other people. Or at least, I thought she was watching and learning. What I didn't realize was that Jessica was developing completely different attitudes about money, success, and family relationships. Attitudes that would eventually put her in direct conflict with the values David and I had spent decades living by. When Jessica was young, she saw our careful budgeting and conservative lifestyle and assumed we were struggling financially, like many of her friends' families. We lived in the same house we'd purchased in 1981, drove reliable but not luxurious cars, and took family vacations that emphasized education and experience rather than expensive resorts or exclusive destinations. Mom, why don't we live in a bigger house like the Washingtons? Jessica asked when she was 12, comparing our home to that of a classmate whose father was a successful physician. Because we're investing our money in assets that will grow in value over time, I explained. The Washingtons spend their money on things that make them look successful. We're using our money to actually become financially independent. There's a big difference. But their house has a swimming pool and a 3-car garage, Jessica persisted. And our investments will probably pay for your college education and allow us to retire comfortably, David added. Which do you think will matter more in 20 years? I thought we were teaching Jessica important lessons about delayed gratification, intelligent financial planning, and the difference between appearing wealthy and actually building wealth. But looking back, I think Jessica internalized different lessons entirely. She learned that her parents had money, but chose not to spend it on the things she wanted. She learned that financial security was less important than social status. She learned that being wealthy was meaningless unless you displayed that wealth in ways that impressed other people. These different attitudes about money remained largely hidden during Jessica's childhood and young adulthood. She was a good student, graduated from Stanford with minimal debt thanks to our careful college savings planning, and seemed to appreciate the financial foundation we'd provided for her education and early career. But the cracks in our different value systems became apparent after she married Michael Morrison in 2010. Michael came from a family that had always lived beyond their means despite decent incomes, simply because they'd never learned to delay gratification or plan for the future. His parents drove expensive cars they couldn't afford, lived in a house that stretched their budget to the breaking point, and had virtually no retirement savings despite being in their 50s. Michael's family really knows how to enjoy life, Jessica commented after spending a weekend with her new in-laws. They don't worry about saving every penny for some theoretical future. They live in the moment and enjoy what they've worked for. There's nothing wrong with enjoying life, I replied carefully, but there's also wisdom in planning for the future. Michael's parents are going to have a very difficult retirement if they don't start saving soon. Maybe they'd rather enjoy their younger years instead of pinching pennies until they're too old to appreciate having money, Jessica said. And I heard something in her tone that suggested this wasn't really about Michael's parents. It was about her own childhood and the choices David and I had made about how to use our growing wealth. Over the following years, as Jessica and Michael established their household and started their family, their spending patterns became increasingly different from the financial discipline David and I had always practiced. They bought the biggest house they could qualify for rather than a house they could easily afford. They drove new cars with high monthly payments rather than reliable used vehicles. They took expensive vacations and justified them as investments in family memories. Jessica and Michael seem to be spending money as fast as they earn it, I mentioned to David one evening after learning about their latest major purchase, a luxury kitchen renovation that cost more than our first investment property. Different. Generations have different attitudes about money, David replied diplomatically. Maybe they'll find their own path to financial security, or maybe they'll find themselves in trouble when they hit their first major financial crisis, I said. Lifestyle inflation is incredibly dangerous, especially when it's based on the assumption that income will always increase. I was right to be concerned. When Michael's startup company failed during the economic uncertainty of 2020, Jessica and Michael found themselves in exactly the kind of financial crisis that proper emergency planning could have prevented. They had virtually no savings, high fixed expenses, and no backup plan for reduced income. That's when Jessica first approached us for financial help, not as a loan with repayment terms, but as a family obligation that she seemed to believe. We owed her simply because we had the resources and she had the need. Mom and Dad, she said during a family dinner at our house, Michael and I are going through a really tough time with the business failure, and we're hoping you might be able to help us out financially until things get back to normal. Of course. We can help, David replied immediately. How much do you need? And what kind of repayment timeline works for your budget? Jessica looked surprised by the question about repayment. Well, I wasn't really thinking about this as a loan. More like family helping family. I mean, you guys have plenty of money and we're really struggling. That was the first time I realized that Jessica had developed a fundamentally different understanding of family financial relationships than David and I shared. In her mind, our wealth was a family resource that should be available to solve her problems. In our minds, our wealth was the result of decades of discipline and smart decisions, and helping family members meant teaching them to make similar decisions rather than simply transferring money to cover the consequences of poor planning. When David was diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer in 2018, Jessica's response revealed just how completely her attitudes about family and money had changed from the values we'd tried to instill. "Mom," she said during one of our conversations about David's treatment options, "I hope you're planning to use your savings to get Dad the absolute best medical care available. I mean, what's the point of having all that money if you're not going to spend it when it really matters?" "Of course we're going to make sure he gets excellent medical care," I replied, "but we're also going to be strategic about how we structure that care so that it's both effective and financially sustainable." "But you could afford to fly him to the Mayo Clinic, hire the best specialists in the country, get experimental treatments that aren't covered by insurance. Money shouldn't be a consideration when it comes to Dad's health." "Jessica, your father and I have been planning for this possibility since we were your age. The goal isn't to spend every dollar we have on medical care, it's to ensure that he gets excellent treatment while also preserving enough resources for me to maintain my independence and dignity for whatever years I have left." That conversation revealed how little Jessica understood about the relationship between money and independence, between financial planning and personal dignity. She saw our wealth as something to be spent when circumstances seemed to justify spending it. We saw our wealth as something that gave us choices and control over our lives, which meant being strategic about when and how we used financial resources. David's cancer treatment was successful, but his experience with the medical system made us both more aware of how important it was to maintain our independence and decision-making authority as we aged. We updated our estate planning documents, established healthcare directives, and created legal protections to ensure that our assets would be used according to our wishes rather than someone else's assumptions about what was best for us. When David died peacefully in his sleep in 2020, not from cancer, but from the heart attack that ultimately claimed him at 78, Jessica's response to my grief revealed how completely she'd forgotten the values we'd tried to teach her about family relationships and mutual respect. Instead of supporting my decision to grieve and adjust to widowhood at my own pace, Jessica immediately began treating me like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be comforted. She started making suggestions about simplifying my life, reducing my responsibilities, and accepting help with tasks I'd been managing independently for decades. The grieving widow she'd been patronizing for the past 2 years was actually someone who understood property law, tax planning, and investment strategy better than most financial professionals. The declining mother she'd been isolating from her support network was actually someone whose legal expertise had built a property empire worth over $6.8 million. Jessica had been treating me like a financial burden when I was actually a financial powerhouse who'd been choosing to live quietly rather than ostentatiously. She was about to learn exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who spent 5 decades building wealth and protecting people's rights through intelligence, discipline, and strategic thinking. The foundation she'd never bothered to understand was about to become the platform for her very expensive education in respect, legal consequences, and the true meaning of family loyalty. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that makes you grateful to live in Northern California, where autumn brings relief from summer heat without the harsh bite of winter that defines the season in other parts of the country. I woke at 6 a.m., as I had every day for the past 40 years, and began my morning routine with the systematic precision that had characterized every important day of my professional life. Today was going to be very important indeed. By 7:30 a.m., I was dressed in my best charcoal gray suit, the one I reserved for court appearances and high-stakes negotiations, and sitting in my home office reviewing the notes I'd compiled over the weekend. Rebecca Martinez had scheduled a 9 a.m. meeting at her law office, where we would finalize our strategy for addressing Jessica's attempted elder abuse through both civil and criminal legal channels. But first, I had one more phone call to make. Steinberg, Martinez and Associates. This is Patricia. Patricia, this is Margaret Chen. I need to speak with Harold immediately about a personal legal matter that requires the firm's expertise. Harold Steinberg was now 81 years old and officially retired, but he maintained an office at the firm and still consulted on complex cases that required his particular combination of legal knowledge and strategic thinking. More importantly, he was one of the few people who fully understood both my professional capabilities and my financial resources. Margaret, my dear. Harold's familiar voice came on the line within minutes. Patricia said you need legal assistance with a personal matter. How can I help you? Over the next 20 minutes, I walked Harold through Jessica's systematic campaign of deception, her unauthorized financial commitments, and her public announcement at the baby shower. Harold's responses progressed from concern to outrage to what I could only describe as prosecutorial enthusiasm. Margaret, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of elder abuse I've encountered in 50 years of practice. Your daughter has violated multiple state and federal laws, and she's done it in such a public and documented way that prosecution would be almost effortless. Harold, I want to pursue this case with the full resources of the firm. I don't want Jessica to face minimal consequences that she can dismiss as a misunderstanding. I want her to understand that attempting to defraud someone with my legal knowledge and resources carries serious, long-term consequences. What level of response are you thinking about? I'm thinking about criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. I'm thinking about civil litigation for financial damages, emotional distress, and defamation. I'm thinking about restraining orders to prevent future attempts to interfere with my autonomy. And I'm thinking about making this case visible enough that other elderly people can see that they don't have to accept abuse from family members. Harold was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear him calculating the legal and financial implications of the campaign I was proposing. Margaret, you realize that pursuing criminal charges against your own daughter could permanently destroy your relationship with her? Harold, my relationship with Jessica was destroyed the moment she decided to treat me like an incompetent burden who could be manipulated without consequences. What I'm proposing isn't revenge, it's education. Jessica needs to learn that actions have consequences, and other potential elder abusers need to see what happens when they target the wrong person. Margaret, you have my full support and the full resources of this firm. Let's make sure that your daughter's education is thorough, public, and unforgettable. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in Rebecca Martinez's conference room with a legal team that would have impressed corporate executives facing federal investigations. Rebecca had assembled 3 attorneys specializing in elder abuse, criminal fraud, and civil litigation, along with a private investigator who would document every aspect of Jessica's deception. Margaret, Rebecca began, we've reviewed all the evidence you compiled over the weekend, and we have more than enough documentation to pursue both criminal and civil remedies. The question is how aggressively you want to proceed. I want to proceed as aggressively as the law allows. Jessica used my money without authorization, made false statements about my mental capacity to multiple parties, and attempted to institutionalize me without my consent. Those are serious crimes that deserve serious consequences. Here's what we're proposing, said Maria Rodriguez, the criminal law specialist. We file criminal complaints for elder abuse under California Welfare and Institutions Code 15610, financial, fraud under Penal Code 484, and identity theft if she signed any documents in your name. We also file for a civil restraining order that prevents her from accessing your accounts, making statements about your mental capacity, or contacting you, except through legal counsel. What about civil litigation for damages? I asked. We file a comprehensive civil suit for financial damages, emotional distress, defamation, and invasion of privacy, said James Patterson, the civil litigation attorney. We also seek punitive damages that could reach 6 figures depending on what the court determines is necessary to deter similar behavior. How public will these proceedings be? Criminal charges are public record, and if we pursue this aggressively, it will likely generate media attention, Rebecca replied. Elder abuse cases involving professional families in affluent communities tend to attract interest from journalists covering social justice issues. Good. I want this case to be visible. I want other elderly people to see that they don't have to accept abuse from family members. And I want adult children to understand that there are serious consequences for attempting to exploit their parents. Margaret, said Rebecca, I need to ask you one more time if you're sure about this level of legal response. Once we file these charges, there's no putting this back in the box. Your relationship with Jessica will be permanently altered. Rebecca, my relationship with Jessica was permanently altered the moment she announced to 30 strangers that she was putting me in a nursing home without consulting me. What we're doing now is making sure that the consequences match the severity of her actions. Then let's proceed. By Tuesday afternoon, the legal machinery was in motion. Criminal complaints had been filed with the San Mateo County District Attorney's Office. Civil lawsuits had been submitted to the Superior Court. Restraining orders had been issued preventing Jessica from accessing my accounts or making any statements about my mental capacity. And the private investigator had begun documenting the timeline of Jessica's deception for use in both criminal and civil proceedings. Jessica's first indication that her actions had consequences came when 2 sheriff's deputies arrived at her workplace Tuesday morning to serve her with criminal charges and civil litigation papers. According to the private investigator's report, Jessica's colleagues at the marketing firm watched in shock as she was escorted to a conference room for questioning about elder abuse charges. Her supervisor was informed that she was facing potential criminal prosecution for defrauding an elderly family member, which triggered the company's mandatory ethics review process for employees facing felony charges. Jessica called me Tuesday evening, her voice shaking with panic rather than anger. Mom, what have you done? I just spent 6 hours with lawyers and police officers. They're saying I could face felony charges and years in prison. This is insane. Jessica, what I've done is enforce the law. What you did to me constitutes elder abuse under California statute, and the district attorney's office agrees that criminal prosecution is warranted. But I'm your daughter. We're family. How can you have me arrested for trying to help you? Jessica, you used my money without authorization, made false statements about my mental capacity, and attempted to institutionalize me without my consent. Those aren't family helping behaviors. They're crimes. And being my daughter doesn't exempt you from the legal consequences of criminal behavior. Mom, I can't go to prison. I'm pregnant. I have a family. This will destroy my career and my reputation. Jessica, you should have considered those consequences before you decided to defraud someone who understands the law better than you do. Can't we work this out privately? I'll pay back the money, cancel all the nursing home arrangements, apologize publicly, whatever you want. Jessica, you can't undo the damage you've caused by offering to behave appropriately after you've been caught. The time for private resolution was before you committed crimes, not after you've been charged with them. Mom, please, I'm begging you, don't destroy my life over a misunderstanding. Jessica, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a systematic campaign to undermine my autonomy based on lies about my mental capacity. And I'm not destroying your life. I'm holding you accountable for the choices you made when you thought there would be no consequences. By Wednesday, the story had been picked up by the San Francisco Chronicle, whose coverage of elder abuse issues had won several journalism awards. The headline read, "Prominent Bay Area attorney charges daughter with elder abuse after nursing. Home scheme." The article detailed Jessica's unauthorized commitments to Sunset Manor, her false statements about my mental capacity, and her public announcement at the baby shower. But more importantly, it included extensive quotes from my interview about why I'd decided to pursue criminal charges rather than handle the matter privately. Too many elderly people accept abuse from family members because they're afraid of destroying relationships or creating family conflicts, I'd told the reporter. But when adult children believe they can override their parents' autonomy based on false claims about mental capacity, there need to be serious consequences. Age doesn't eliminate a person's right to make their own decisions about their life. The Rouse Chronicle article was picked up by the Associated Press and distributed nationally, generating coverage in major newspapers across the country. Elder rights advocacy groups praised my decision to pursue criminal charges, while legal experts discussed the broader implications of the case for protecting elderly people against family exploitation. The Chen case represents a significant precedent for elder abuse prosecution, said Dr. Emily Rodriguez, director of the National Center for Elder Rights, in an interview with CNN. Too often, these cases are treated as family disputes rather than criminal matters. Mrs. Chen's decision to pursue criminal charges sends a clear message that elder abuse has serious legal consequences, regardless of the family relationship between perpetrator and victim. By Thursday, Jessica's employer had placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal charges. Michael had retained a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime, and their mortgage company had initiated a review of their loan after learning that their primary income earner was facing potential felony conviction. Jessica made one final attempt to reach me Thursday evening, calling from her attorney's office. "Mom, my attorney says that if you're willing to drop the criminal charges, I can plead guilty to lesser civil violations and pay fines and restitution instead of facing prison time. What does your attorney say about the civil lawsuit for damages?" "He says we'd have to negotiate a settlement that could be very expensive, but it would avoid criminal conviction and prison time." "Jessica, I'm not interested in plea bargains or reduced charges. You committed serious crimes against me, and I want you to face the full legal consequences of those actions." "Mom, I'm pregnant. Prison could endanger the baby." "Jessica, you were pregnant when you decided to defraud me. You chose to commit crimes while pregnant, knowing that criminal conviction could affect your child. The consequences you're facing now are the direct result of choices you made. What do you want from me? What can I do to fix this?" "What I want is for you to face the legal consequences of attempting to defraud someone who happens to know more about the law than you anticipated. What I want is for other elderly people to see that they don't have to accept abuse from family members. What I want is for you to understand that age doesn't eliminate a person's right to autonomy and dignity." The trial began 6 weeks later and lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Jessica's systematic deception. Recordings of her false statements to Sunset Manor, documentation of unauthorized credit card charges, testimony from Dr. Patel about Jessica's misrepresentation of medical consultations, and depositions from baby shower guests who'd witnessed her public announcement. Jessica's defense attorney attempted to argue that she'd acted out of genuine concern for my welfare and that her actions constituted poor judgment rather than criminal intent. But the prosecution's presentation of my professional credentials, financial resources, and mental competency eliminated any possibility that Jessica's concerns about my capacity were legitimate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," prosecutor Maria Rodriguez said during closing arguments, "this case is not about a family disagreement over elder care. This is about a daughter who decided to override her mother's autonomy based on fabricated claims about mental decline. Mrs. Chen is a practicing attorney with 45 years of legal experience and a net worth exceeding $6 million. The defendant's claims that her mother needed supervised care were not based on medical reality. They were based on her desire to control her mother's life for her own convenience. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: elder abuse, financial fraud, and identity theft. Jessica was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 5 years of probation, and restitution of $50,000 to cover my legal expenses and damages. But the criminal conviction was only part of her education. The civil lawsuit proceeded separately and resulted in a judgment of $300,000 in compensatory and punitive damages. Jessica's employer terminated her for criminal conviction, making her ineligible for rehire at any company requiring background checks. The criminal conviction also triggered a review by the State Bar Association, which permanently banned her from pursuing legal education or employment. 6 months after Jessica's conviction, I received a letter from her in prison. Not a request for help or forgiveness, but something that might have been the first genuine communication I'd received from her in years. "Dear Mom," it began, "I've spent 6 months in prison thinking about what I did to you, and I finally understand why you pursued criminal charges instead of handling this privately. What I did wasn't family helping family. It was criminal exploitation of someone I assumed was vulnerable. I was completely wrong about your mental capacity, your financial resources, and your legal knowledge. But more importantly, I was wrong about my right to make decisions about your life without consulting you. I know I can't undo the damage I caused to our relationship or repair the reputation I destroyed through my actions. But I want you to know that other women in prison have told me about the Chronicle article and how it helped their families understand that elder abuse isn't something elderly people have to accept. One woman said her daughter stopped trying to control her finances after reading about your case. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for help with my legal problems. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost when I forgot who you really were." With respect and regret, Jessica, I read that letter 3 times, feeling something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't quite rejection either. Jessica had finally learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach, but some lessons come with permanent consequences. Trust, once broken through systematic deception and public humiliation, doesn't automatically repair itself just because the perpetrator finally understands what they've done. But growth and understanding are worth something, even when they come too late to repair the damage they should have prevented. I wrote back, a brief note acknowledging her letter and her growth, expressing hope that she would use her experience to help other families avoid similar situations, and leaving the door open for future conversations without making any promises about what those conversations might lead to. Because here's what I learned from my year of legal warfare. The greatest gift you can give yourself is the knowledge that you don't need anyone else's approval to live according to your own values and priorities. Family relationships are precious when they're based on mutual respect and genuine affection, but they become toxic when they're based on manipulation, false assumptions, or the belief that blood relations excuse behavior that wouldn't be acceptable from strangers. At 71, I'm busier and more professionally engaged than I've been in years. I serve on the board of the California Elder Rights Coalition, where I help other elderly people understand their legal protections against family exploitation. I mentor young women attorneys who are learning to navigate the challenges of building successful legal careers in competitive markets. I've written articles for legal journals about elder abuse prosecution and the importance of maintaining professional competence throughout long careers. Most importantly, I wake up every morning knowing that I'm living according to my own choices, rather than accommodating other people's assumptions about what elderly people should want or need. Jessica's public humiliation at the baby shower ended up giving me back my life in ways I never expected. Her attempt to institutionalize me taught me that vulnerability can be a choice rather than an inevitable result of aging. Her criminal conviction sent a message to other potential elder abusers that targeting the wrong person can result in consequences they never anticipated. And the legal education I delivered taught everyone in my family that respect isn't something you can demand based on blood relationships. It's something you earn through your actions. Your choices, and your treatment of the people who should be able to trust you most. The confused old lady Jessica thought she was managing turned out to be someone who understood the law, possessed substantial resources, and retained the determination to enforce both when circumstances required it. The helpless mother she thought she could manipulate turned out to be someone who could teach lessons about consequences that she'll never forget. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering who people really are when they think you're too weak to protect yourself. And sometimes the most valuable gift you can receive is the motivation to stop accepting other people's limitations and start asserting your own strength. Jessica's baby shower announcement was the cruelest thing she ever did to me. It was also the most liberating, because it freed me from the illusion that our relationship was based on love rather than convenience, respect rather than exploitation. I survived her attempt to institutionalize me, recovered from her systematic deception, and reclaimed my independence. But more than that, I remembered who I was underneath the grief and manipulation and false assumptions. And at 71 years old, I learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to enforce your rights, and never too late to remind people that underestimating the wrong woman can be the most expensive lesson they ever receive. The criminal charges stayed filed. The civil judgment stayed enforced. The lessons stayed learned. And Margaret Chen? She stayed free, stayed strong, and stayed absolutely nobody's burden to be managed. 2 years later, I received an invitation to Jessica's baby shower for her second child, this one properly planned after her release from prison and her family's financial recovery from the legal consequences of her actions. The invitation included a handwritten note. "Mom, I understand if you choose not to attend, but I wanted you to know that you're welcome and that I've learned to ask people about their preferences instead of making assumptions about what's best for them." I didn't attend the shower, but I did send a gift, a children's book about respecting elderly people, along with a note that said, "For your child's education about treating all people with dignity, regardless of their age." Because some lessons are worth passing on to the next generation, even when the previous generation had to learn them the hard way. And sometimes the most important gift you can give a grandchild you may never know is the knowledge that their grandmother was someone who refused to be diminished, dismissed, or disrespected, no matter who thought they had the right to try. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.